In a memory of a summer festival, a young Kusunoki muses about the future, 10 years from then. He sits beside his childhood friend Himeno, who notes they'll be 20 then, old enough to drink and smoke, while Kusunoki adds that marriage would come even earlier. But a shadow of doubt crosses Kusunoki's mind. He admits he doesn't feel like he'll be able to do it. When Himeno asks why, he explains there's too much he dislikes, and she laughs in agreement. Kusunoki then begins to propose an idea. Kusunoki continues his thought, suggesting a pact for when they turn 20. He asks if Himeno would want to be with him, should they both find themselves single and left on the shelf. Kusunoki is taken aback by his own boldness. Himeno, blushing slightly, looks away. She dismisses it as a joke and tells him to forget it. As they walk away, she adds that she just wanted to hear herself say it, confidently stating that she would never go unsold. In the present, Kusunoki bows and offers a sincere apology. He recalls a disastrous day at his part-time job where, overcome by the heat, he crashed and made a mess. After his 19th apology of the day, he remembers fainting from a dizzy spell. Sitting alone in his sparse room, Kusunoki looks at a message on his phone. It's from his manager, acknowledging his rough day and advising him to take care and rest. The message, likely a notice of his termination, leaves him looking utterly dejected. He stares blankly at his empty refrigerator. The sight leaves him speechless. He slams the door shut. Opening his equally empty wallet, he realizes that selling his CDs and books is the only option left, a thought that pains him. He looks at his packed bookshelves and his collection of CDs. Lying on the floor, he reflects on these possessions. They were all second-hand, but each was a purchase he had made with careful consideration. His room lacked even a computer or a TV. His collection of books and CDs seemed to be the only things of value he had left. He packs them into bags. With his possessions gathered, he prepares to leave his apartment. Carrying the heavy bags, Kusunoki walks down the street. He pauses, the weight of his decision evident on his face as he sweats under the sun. He pushes open the door to an old, quiet bookstore. The shop is silent and overflowing with books. He stands inside, holding his bag of books. He announces that he is there to sell them. An elderly man with glasses, Gramps, appears from behind the counter. Kusunoki places the bag on the counter. The old man looks at him and asks if he is moving. Kusunoki denies that he's moving. Gramps calls selling the books wasteful. Kusunoki wryly comments that paper doesn't have much nutritional value. The old man understands that he's short on cash. He tells Kusunoki the evaluation will take about 30 minutes. Kusunoki waits outside the small bookstore. He looks up at the sky and power lines. His expression is somber as he waits. After the evaluation, Kusunoki is presented with a small tray of money for his books. He looks at the meager payment. As he prepares to leave, Gramps stops him. The old man says he has something important to tell him. Kusunoki asks what it is. Gramps correctly guesses that Kusunoki is hurting for money and that it's not a recent problem. The old man says he's not interested in the details of his poverty. He just wants to ask one thing. Standing amidst the towering shelves of the bookstore, Gramps asks an unbelievable question. Does he want to sell some of his lifespan? Kusunoki is stunned, questioning what he just heard. Gramps confirms he meant lifespan, but clarifies that he is not the one buying it. He adds that he knows it sells for a lot. He acknowledges that Kusunoki must think he is either joking or senile. Gramps tells him that if he wants to entertain the nonsense, he will tell him where to go, insisting he is not lying. Kusunoki recounts the old man's story. On the 4th floor of a nearby building, there is a shop that buys lifespan. Kusunoki remembers the old man explaining that the value of a lifespan differs from person to person based on how rich a life they would have lived. Gramps had added that while he didn't know Kusunoki well, he didn't seem like a bad guy and had decent taste in books. Kusunoki had wondered if his life must have some value. The old man also mentioned that the shop apparently buys time and health too. Kusunoki had asked about the difference between lifespan and time. Gramps couldn't provide details, admitting he'd never sold any himself. The old man handed him a piece of paper with directions. Walking away, Kusunoki dismissed the idea as too good to be true, the mere fantasy of an old man nearing his death. He stops at a vending machine, still clutching his bag. He swallows nervously, contemplating his next move. He decides to visit a record store to sell his CDs. He enters the record market. A young clerk with light-colored hair welcomes him. Kusunoki approaches the counter and presents his bag of CDs for sale. The clerk takes the bag and begins to look through them. The clerk seems surprised by the sale, wondering about the turn of events. Kusunoki notes that it was the same reaction as the old bookstore clerk. He could tell the young man was itching to ask why he would let go of so many CDs. Just as before, he explained his financial situation. The clerk, impressed with Kusunoki's taste in music, tells him he has something good for him. He explains that he's a fan of Kusunoki's musical taste. Leaning in conspiratorially, he says that maybe he shouldn't be telling him this. He reveals that here in town, there's a shop where they will buy his lifespan. Kusunoki realizes that what the clerk said was more or less the same as the old man's story, but it seemed this man had actually sold some of his lifespan. Wondering if it was some new trend to make fun of poor people, he asks how much it went for. The clerk replies that he can't really say. He simply hands Kusunoki his payment. Kusunoki compares the two sets of directions and finds that they perfectly match. He buys a can of soda from a nearby vending machine. Deciding he might as well go today, he holds the cold can. He opens the can with a sharp hiss. He chugs the soda. Leaning against a fence, he finishes the drink. He examines the maps one last time. He looks up at the sky thoughtfully. He crushes the empty can and walks off with renewed purpose. In the end, despite his disbelief, Kusunoki finds himself standing in front of the building described in the directions. He walks up the stairs inside the building. He tells himself that he doesn't believe their story. He rationalizes that there must be some lucrative but dangerous job offered there, and that's what they were trying to tell him about. This, he concludes, is what they really wanted to share with him. He arrives at the door marked 401. He hesitates for a moment. Then he reaches for the handle. With a click, the door opens. He steps inside to find a brightly lit, modern shop with a checkered floor. However, the display cases are completely empty. The shelves are bare as well. Kusunoki looks around, bewildered by the strange, vacant room. Suddenly, a calm voice welcomes him. Kusunoki turns to see a young woman with dark hair and glasses, Miyagi, observing him with a neutral expression. Miyagi gets straight to the point, asking him if he is there to sell his time or his health. She then asks if he is there to sell his lifespan. Staring back, shocked but resolute, Kusunoki makes his choice. The woman at the counter informs Kusunoki that his evaluation will take about 3 hours. As he waits, the very idea of selling his lifespan triggers a memory of a morality lesson from his elementary school days. In the flashback, his teacher reminds the class that life is irreplaceable and priceless. She then poses a hypothetical question: if a human life had to be given a monetary value, what would it be? A young girl, the class smartalek, raises her hand, ready with an answer she read in a book, estimating a lifetime's earnings to be between 100 and 300 million yen. The teacher acknowledges that many adults might give a similar answer. But she urges her students to think differently, presenting a scenario. She asks them to imagine someone offering to buy their entire life from them. A student asks what would happen if they sold it. The teacher replies simply that they would die, making it an offer they should refuse. She continues the hypothetical, suggesting the person might persist, asking for just half of their remaining years. Young Kusunoki, listening intently, thinks to himself that he might actually consider selling under those circumstances. The teacher then poses the main question: how would one assign a per-year value to their lifespan? She tells the students there is no right answer, but she is interested in their reasoning. One student starts calculating based on the 300 million yen figure. Meanwhile, young Kusunoki privately estimates his own life to be worth at least 3 billion. One girl protests that you cannot put a value on a person's life. Internally, Kusunoki scoffs, thinking he would charge a disposal fee to live her gloomy life. Another boy, the class clown, jokes that no one would even pay 300 yen for his life. It was a self-deprecating thought that mirrored Kusunoki's own cynicism. Kusunoki reflects that while the teacher claimed there was no right answer, one did exist. 10 years later, at the age of 20, he would learn the true value of his lifespan by selling it. He looks up at the building where the shop is located. His stomach rumbles with hunger and nerves. He checks his empty wallet one last time. Running a hand through his hair, he prepares to wait. He wanders through the quiet streets, passing the station entrance. He sits on a bench in a small park, a solitary figure waiting for his life to be appraised. Sitting on the bench, Kusunoki hopes his life sells for a lot. While waiting for the evaluation, he tries to make a lowball estimate of his life's worth. He settles on a minimum of 300 million yen, a significant downgrade from his childhood fantasy of 3 billion. Then he recalls his more cynical thought from that day, that he'd probably ask for a disposal fee. After 3 hours, he returns to the shop where the woman announces his evaluation is complete. She calls him Mr. Kusunoki, startling him, as he never gave her his name or any ID. He realizes the business operates far beyond the bounds of common sense. Miyagi begins to state the result, starting with the number 3. Kusunoki's mind races, a manic grin spreading across his face as he believes his childhood estimate of 3 billion was correct. Miyagi types at her keyboard. She prints out the official estimate. She presents the paper to Kusunoki, which shows an estimated value of 300,000 yen, and asks him what he would like to do. Kusunoki calculates that 300,000 yen per year for 80 years would only be 24 million in total. He lets out a deep sigh of despair. The figure seems insultingly cheap. Miyagi waits patiently for his decision. Kusunoki looks up with grim determination. After a long pause, he decides that he will have to take the 24 million. Miyagi corrects his misunderstanding. His per-year value was the bare minimum of 10,000 yen, and with 30 years and 3 months remaining, the total he can receive is only 300,000 yen. Kusunoki is left utterly stunned. A bitter, humorless laugh escapes Kusunoki. He looks at the form again, confirming the results were far below his expectations, a total of 300,000 yen for over 30 years of his life. Desperate for an explanation, Kusunoki asks about the standards for the evaluation. Miyagi sighs, explaining that a separate consulting body handles the details, so she doesn't know the specifics. However, she has heard that factors like happiness, self-actualization, and contribution to society greatly affect the value. Kusunoki processes this internally. The value of his life is determined by how happy he will be and what he achieves. The low price means his future holds no happiness, no achievements, and no contribution to society. Faced with this bleak reality, he wonders where he can possibly find salvation. He leaves the building with the envelope of cash. Ultimately, he sold all 30 years of his remaining lifespan, keeping only 3 months for himself. He chugs a drink to wash down his meal. He stops to eat, the reality of his choice sinking in. Later that night, Kusunoki walks alone down a dark road. He reflects on his childhood, when he thought he would grow up to be famous. He arrogantly looked down on the other children. Lacking the skill or humility to hide his pride, he was naturally disliked by his classmates. Though he always got perfect test scores, he wasn't the only one. The smart aleck from the classroom flashback Yahello was his equal. Because they were rivals, neither could be number 1, so they quarreled on the surface. Despite their rivalry, they were the only ones who could relate to each other on the same intellectual level. Their families were also close friends, so they had played together since they were infants, making them childhood friends. This shared history led to a moment at a festival. As they sat together, Kusunoki brought up their future when they turned 20. Yahello then made a shameful suggestion, if by then neither of them had found anyone to marry. The memory is interrupted by the sound of his doorbell. Hungover and annoyed, Kusunoki stumbles to the door. He mutters that he drank too much. Standing at his door is a young woman with long, dark hair and a solemn expression. Still groggy, Kusunoki asks who she is. The woman calmly puts on a pair of glasses. Her face is now familiar to him. He recognizes her as the woman who evaluated his lifespan the day before. She confirms this is correct. She introduces herself as Miyagi, stating that she will be his observer from now on. Miyagi explains that because his lifespan is now less than a year, she must begin observing him today. Overwhelmed and feeling sick, Kusunoki cuts her off, asking if it can wait until later. Miyagi agrees, and Kusunoki realizes the last 3 months of his life have begun in the worst way imaginable. Kusunoki lies on the floor of his sparse room, while the girl Miyagi sits quietly by the window with her suitcase. He recalls selling his lifespan, a decision that led directly to Miyagi's arrival. In a flashback to their conversation, Miyagi explains that people who sell their lifespans often become desperate and start to cause trouble. To protect against such situations, they established the observer system. Kusunoki asks what would happen if he were to cause some of this trouble. Miyagi states that his life would be terminated immediately. Kusunoki realizes that Miyagi, his observer, holds the power to end his life with a single phone call. He glances over at her, unnerved by her quiet presence. Miyagi advises him to act normally and pretend she isn't there, a suggestion Kusunoki finds impossible to follow. Miyagi explains that for his last 3 days, she will cease her observation, asking him to endure until then. Kusunoki recalls her explanation that people with only a few days left tend to lose the will to trouble others. Because of this resignation, they are granted solitude for their final 3 days. Stretching, Kusunoki realizes he's slept for a long time. He checks his clock and sees that it's late, lamenting the wasted time on his first day. Miyagi watches him silently. Kusunoki tells himself to just ignore her. He splashes cold water on his face, trying to wake up properly. After changing his shirt, he decides to head out. He walks through his kitchen towards the front door. As he leaves, Miyagi follows close behind. They walk in silence across a small bridge. Kusunoki inserts a coin into a vending machine. With Miyagi watching him, Kusunoki wonders how she plans to eat. Her demeanor is so detached that he finds it believable she might not need to eat or drink at all. Back at his apartment, Kusunoki sits down to write while Miyagi watches. He opens a notebook and labels a page, "Things to do before I die." He pauses, thoughtfully scratching his head. He writes down his first few items: not going to school, not working, and eating tasty things. He continues to brainstorm ideas for his list. His final thought is to tell Hyuno how he feels. As he considers this, Miyagi interjects, suggesting he avoid that one. His completed list now includes seeing beautiful things, writing a will, talking with Naros, and confessing to Hyuno. Kusunoki questions Miyagi, asking if it is her duty as an observer to meddle in his affairs. She bluntly replies that Ms. Hyuno scarcely remembers him. Miyagi continues, revealing she even knows about the promise he made to Hyuno at age 10, shocking him. Kusunoki asks if her words mean she knows everything that's going to happen. Miyagi shakes her head no. She explains that all she knows are the possibilities of what might have occurred in his future. However, since he sold his lifespan and drastically changed his future, that information is now meaningless. Miyagi reveals that in his potential future, Ms. Hyuno was a very significant person and his life summary was filled with her. Kusunoki questions if this means everything else was unimportant. Miyagi agrees that it might be, and advises that meeting Ms. Hyuno now would be a waste of time. She insists that seeing Hyuno would only spoil his memory of her. Kusunoki thanks her for the concern, but states his memory of her was spoiled a long time ago. He suggests that she might be trying to protect him from getting hurt. He argues that her actions are taking away his freedom to get hurt and despair. He tells her it was meddlesome, as he would have preferred to hear the truth directly from Hyuno's mouth. With a sigh, Miyagi replies that she only had good intentions. Miyagi turns to Kusunoki and apologizes. She promises to respect his freedom to get hurt and despair and will no longer meddle with the items on his list. Miyagi tells him to do as he pleases, promising not to stop him as long as he does not trouble others. They return to their silent cohabitation, with Kusunoki at his desk and Miyagi by the window. Kusunoki thinks to himself that he was going to do that anyway. He recalls noticing that Miyagi had a somber look on her face. Despite seeing it, he chose not to dwell on what her expression might have meant. Kusunoki decides to make a phone call and tells Miyagi he will be right back. He steps outside and walks down the street. He notes to himself that, of course, she is still following him. He opens his phone, the screen showing the recipient is Wakana. As he makes the call, he reflects that the certainty of his remaining time has made him yearn for human interaction. His mind flashes back to when he met Wakana in April. In the memory, he rudely tells her to move so he can check a shelf. Wakana looks up from her book, surprised. Wakana approaches him and asks if they have met before. He tells her no and she apologizes for bothering him, explaining that he looked familiar. Kusunoki confirms that they essentially met right there in the bookstore. Wakana agrees and a few days later they met again at college. They started having lunches together, talking about books and music. Wakana was impressed, saying she had never met someone her age who read more than her. Kusunoki deflected, saying reading is just what people do when they have nothing else. Wakana asks Kusunoki if he has anything to do besides his part-time jobs. When he says no, she cheerfully declares that they will have to find something for him to do. He recalls that she was the only girl in college who showed him any affection. Despite this, he valued his promise to Hymeneal and treated Wakana bluntly to keep her from getting hopeful. He shuts his phone, realizing she is not able to answer. He sighs, feeling a strange sense of relief. He decides to send her a text instead, asking if she wants to do something tomorrow. His phone buzzes instantly with a reply. Kusunoki looks at his phone, but the message is an automated error reply. He stares at the screen while Miyagi observes him. Miyagi says it is time to compare answers. She tells a stunned Kusunoki that the woman he just tried to call was his last ray of hope. She clarifies that Ms. Wakana was the last person he thought may have loved him. Kusunoki and Miyagi stand silently in the street. He decides against going inside, opting to smoke a cigarette and then go to the supermarket. In his basket, he places a pack of beer. He also grabs some instant noodles. They wander through the brightly lit supermarket. Kusunoki reflects that despite having 300,000 yen, he has no idea what to spend it on. He glances at Miyagi's basket and sees it's full of food, realizing that she does eat after all. As they walk down an aisle together, he thinks they must look like a couple. He muses that it's a ridiculous but happy hallucination of being lovers on a shopping trip. He reflects that if he's being honest, Miyagi's very existence is disagreeable to him. But he can't deny that he enjoyed the late-night shopping trip with her, even if her only goal is to observe him. He admits that living with a girl and going on casual shopping trips has long been a secret desire of his. Walking home together, he considers the feeling an empty happiness, but one he couldn't help but genuinely feel. Kusunoki, with less than 3 months to live, offers his observer Miyagi a drink. She declines, stating she's on duty, and continues to write in her notebook. Curious, he asks what she is writing. She plainly states it is a record of his actions. Kusunoki informs her that he's drunk, a fact she calmly acknowledges. Miyagi says she is already aware that he wants to drink with her. He declares his intention to use his last 3 months and 300,000 yen to change something about his life. He downs the rest of his beer. Then he slams the empty can on the table for emphasis. Driven by the thought of his impending death, Kusunoki vows to get back at the world. Miyagi coolly replies that this is a common sentiment. She calls his newfound determination a critical misjudgment born from finally noticing his past mistakes. She explains that the reason his 30 years of life sold for only 300,000 yen was because he had accomplished absolutely nothing. Kusunoki questions what a man who failed for 30 years could possibly change in just 3 months. Miyagi calmly replies that they won't know unless they try. She counters that while 3 months is too short to change anything significant, it is also too long to do nothing. She suggests it would be more shrewd to accumulate small joys, telling him that he loses because he only considers victory. Defeated, Kusunoki covers his face and admits she's right. He laments that even now, he can't fully grasp how useless he truly is. He turns to Miyagi and asks if she can tell him about the future he sold. He wonders if hearing about his lost 30 years might finally help him stop having unreasonable hopes. Miyagi pauses for a moment. She agrees, thinking it might be for the best that he knows everything. She warns him not to despair at what she is about to say. She reminds him that what she knows are merely possibilities that can no longer happen, and he confirms he understands. Kusunoki claims he has no reason to despair, and Miyagi quietly hopes it doesn't come to that. Miyagi begins, explaining that his college years would have passed with him simply reading, listening to music, and sleeping. After graduating with no particular skills, he would ironically end up in a factory job, the kind of work he scorned most. His life would become a vacant cycle of work, with drinking as the only thing to look forward to. Approaching his late 30s, his only hobby would be riding his motorcycle aimlessly to combat the loneliness. The dangerous hobby would lead to an accident, with the only mercy being that he was the only one injured. He would lose half his face, his ability to walk, and most of his fingers, confining him to a wheelchair. Though he'd consider suicide, a sliver of false hope that things might get better would stop him from taking the final plunge. This false hope would carry him to age 50, where he would die alone and in shambles, remembered by no one and filled with regret. After Miyagi finishes her grim story, she asks for his thoughts. Kusunoki smiles faintly, saying he's truly glad he sold off all 30 of those miserable years. A firework streaks into the night sky. The sudden bang of the fireworks startles both Kusunoki and Miyagi in the quiet room. As Miyagi moves towards the window, Kusunoki identifies the sound. Miyagi slides open the glass door to get a better look at the fireworks. Her expression is unreadable as the colorful explosions light up the night. Kusunoki teases her, asking if an observer should be staring outside when her interest is piqued. Miyagi retorts by asking if he wants her to watch him, or what he would do if she suddenly left. He dismisses her, saying he wants her gone as soon as possible, as her constant presence makes it hard to do anything. As they watch the fireworks, Kusunoki muses that it might have been better to sell all but 3 days of his life. Miyagi informs him that he is allowed 2 more lifespan transactions, and if he truly can't stand her presence, selling the rest of his time is an option. Kusunoki internally considers her offer. It seems like an elegant solution, but he's still trapped by the hope that something good might happen. He reminds himself that the next 3 months are distinct from the lost years Miyagi described. His future isn't set in stone, and he decides he can't die just yet. Later, the sound of rain fills the night. At 3:00 a.m., Kusunoki is woken from his sleep. He notices a sweet smell in the air. He sees Miyagi sitting silently in the corner of the room. He recognizes the scent as women's shampoo. He realizes that while he was asleep, Miyagi must have used his shower. Dismissing the thought, Kusunoki tries to go back to sleep. Finding it difficult, he decides to listen to music. He puts on one of his own unsold CDs, reflecting that anyone who listens to this music on sleepless nights will never live a decent life. He thinks about how he used music to excuse himself from trying to fit into the world. He wonders if he is still paying the price for that now. He sits up and looks at his list of things to do before he dies, contemplating his next move. The next morning, Miyagi asks him how he plans to spend the day. Kusunoki remains silent. He thinks to himself that, strictly in terms of appearance, Miyagi is exactly his type. He reflects that if his observer had been an ugly, middle-aged man, he would feel more relaxed. But having Miyagi around only draws attention to his own warped desires and causes him embarrassment. Miyagi interrupts his thoughts, questioning if the items on his list are things he truly wants to do deep in his heart. Miyagi says his list feels like things someone else might want to do before they die. Kusunoki concedes that maybe the truth is there isn't a single thing he wants to do. Even still, Miyagi believes there must be a method more suited to him. Kusunoki resolves to be more honest with his warped desires and miserable hopes. He decides to think cheaper, more vulgar, and spend his last months following his instincts. With this new resolve, he picks up his phone and finds Narus's contact. As his phone rings, he thinks there is nothing left to lose at this point. He and Miyagi wait at a train station platform. He seems surprised by something, looking up with a start. A rainbow has appeared in the sky after the rain. Miyagi tells him to take a good look, as it may be the last one he ever sees. Kusunoki quietly agrees. The thought strikes him that anything he does now could be for the last time. They arrive at a diner. As Kusunoki sits at a booth, he is greeted by a waiter. He spots someone waving at him from across the restaurant. Kusunoki greets him, saying it's been a long time. Narus approaches, waving cheerfully and asking how he's been. Kusunoki forces a smile and replies that he's been doing pretty good. Kusunoki explains to Miyagi that his high school friend, Narus, is on his way. He describes their relationship as an odd pairing. Narus was popular while he was an outcast, yet they were similar in a strange way. He recalls how they could always laugh off bad things together and tells Miyagi he's hoping for one more carefree chat with him. Miyagi quietly acknowledges his wish. However, Kusunoki admits to himself that he has a hidden motive. He secretly hopes that Narus will see him with Miyagi and misinterpret their relationship. He wants to feel like the boyfriend of a pretty girl just once before he dies. With this pathetic hope in mind, he turns to Miyagi with a request. A waitress approaches their table to take their order. Kusunoki asks for a coffee. He then turns to Miyagi, asking if she's not getting anything. Miyagi quietly tells him he should avoid speaking to her in public. Kusunoki is taken aback, questioning if that's a problem. Miyagi reminds him that observers like her cannot be sensed by anyone except the person they are observing. To demonstrate, she tugs on the waitress's sleeve, who has no reaction. She clarifies that any sensation she imparts on someone is treated as if it never happened. To everyone else, Kusunoki appears to be talking to thin air. The realization dawns on Kusunoki. When Miyagi asks about his request, he dismisses it, telling her to forget it. He begins to second-guess meeting Naruse at all. Just then Naruse walks in, and Kusunoki raises a hand in greeting. Naruse greets Kusunoki cheerfully, saying it's been a long time. Kusunoki replies that he's been doing well. Naruse orders a coffee and chides him for not keeping in touch more. Kusunoki reflects that they quickly fell back into their old, easy way of talking, just like in high school. For a moment, while they laughed about pointless things, he was able to forget about his impending death. Kusunoki felt he was genuinely having fun, until Naruse changed the subject. He asks Kusunoki if he still draws. Startled, Kusunoki denies it, saying he hasn't drawn since he started college. Naruse simply replies that he thought so. Naruse laughs, adding that he doesn't know what he would have done if Kusunoki was still drawing. That single comment shatters Kusunoki's brief moment of happiness. Internally, Kusunoki thinks that's the one thing Naruse shouldn't laugh at. He acknowledges that he gave up on drawing, but that doesn't make it okay to mock. He had believed that, of all people, Naruse would have understood that. Miyagi interrupts his thoughts, proposing they compare answers. She observes that he seems to have grown to hate Naruse, which Kusunoki tells her to be quiet about. Miyagi then reveals that Naruse isn't as fond of him as he believes. She explains that they were destined to meet 2 years from now, have a minor dispute, and part ways angrily. Miyagi advises him to cut ties now before it reaches that point. She tells him nothing good will come from placing his hopes in Naruse. Overwhelmed, Kusunoki's anger boils over, and his hand tightens around his water glass. In a fit of rage, Kusunoki throws the glass against the wall, shattering it. Naruse stares in shock. The waitress calls out in alarm. Without a word, Kusunoki and Miyagi leave the diner. Later, at a batting cage, Kusunoki vents his frustration, swinging the bat with all his might. Miyagi watches from a bench. He reflects that he feels no regret for leaving Naruse like that. Kusunoki realizes he didn't care about Naruse as a person, but rather sought his approval as a way to love himself. He concedes that while Naruse had changed, he hadn't, and maybe his old friend was right. He turns to Miyagi. He apologizes for his outburst and asks if she was hurt. Miyagi confirms she wasn't hit. Kusunoki apologizes again. He spontaneously asks if she wants to get a drink with him once she's done with her observation log. Miyagi seems surprised by the question, confirming if he's asking her to drink with him. Kusunoki admits that he is because he's lonely. She declines, stating she's on the job, leading him to grumble. Miyagi apologizes, explaining she just found his suggestion odd. She then admits that she gets lonely sometimes, just like anyone else, and Kusunoki processes this. Later, he reflects that he needs to revise his view of things. He had hoped deep down that facing death might make the world a little nicer, but he now sees that was foolish. Kusunoki decides to write a will. He wonders what he wants to say and to whom. Closing his eyes, he immediately thinks of his childhood friend Hymenno. He resolves to spend the next hour writing her a letter. He drafts a letter confessing his love for her, explaining how her memory kept him alive until he was 20. But after reading it over, he dismisses it as no good. He collapses onto the floor. He wonders when the last time he even wrote a letter was. He recalls a memory from 10 years ago, when his teacher instructed the class to write a letter to their future selves. She suggested prompts like asking if their dreams came true or if they were happy. Finally, she told them to write the name of their best friend at the end of the letter. Back in the present, Miyagi and Kusunoki are in his apartment. Miyagi asks Kusunoki what his plans are for the day. He replies with 2 words, time capsule raiding. As they stand outside his old school, Miyagi questions if he plans to sneak onto the grounds and start digging in broad daylight, but Kusunoki assures her he'll wait until night. He admits the idea was spur of the moment, and he's not sure how to kill time until then. Miyagi suggests he could visit some places from his past. Kusunoki dismisses the idea, stating he doesn't have many good memories in this town. Miyagi assumes he's excluding his time with Hymenno. He snaps at her, telling her not to bring up Hymenno's name so lightly, and Miyagi agrees to be more cautious. Kusunoki looks up at the hot summer sky. As Miyagi applies something to her arm, Kusunoki asks if she's really invisible to everyone but him. She confirms this is essentially always the case. She clarifies that she's only seen by those she observes, though there are exceptions. This makes Kusunoki wonder why she bothers with her appearance if no one else can see her. Miyagi counters by asking if he wouldn't shower even if he had no plans to meet anyone, stating that she does it for herself. Kusunoki senses that she took offense to his remark, but he feels glad he got back at her. They continue walking in silence. Their walk through the woods leads them to an unexpected sight. They find an old, abandoned bus half swallowed by nature. Miyagi asks what it is, and Kusunoki explains that it's a secret base. Kusunoki steps aboard the dilapidated bus. He looks around the dusty interior. His eyes linger on the old driver's seat and controls. He looks up at the ceiling. He sees a faint drawing of an umbrella with his and Himeno's names written underneath it. After a moment, he climbs out of the bus. Kusunoki climbs onto the roof of the bus, with Miyagi following behind him. He lies down while Miyagi sits quietly nearby. He stares up at the sky through the tree branches. Night falls and they arrive at the school. Kusunoki begins digging. He grows tired and worries that the time capsule might have already been dug up. He takes a smoke break, watching Miyagi wait patiently by the school building. After more digging, his shovel finally hits something hard with a clank. He looks up, a sense of relief washing over him as he announces that he's found it. There, in the hole he dug, lies the time capsule he buried 10 years ago. Kusunoki opens the time capsule he just unearthed. Inside, he finds a stack of letters written by his classmates 10 years ago. He begins to read through them one by one, searching for a connection to his past. Miyagi questions if he should be looking at other people's letters, but Kusunoki justifies his actions by reminding her that he's going to die in a few months. As he reads, he starts drawing lines in a notebook, connecting the names mentioned in each letter. He expected this outcome, but the reality is still disappointing. After reading all the letters, he realizes his name is the only one not connected to anyone else. To make matters worse, the one letter he truly hoped to find, Himeno's, is missing. He clings to the thought that if only her letter were there, she would have mentioned him. As they walk along a dark country road, Miyagi confronts him. She tells him he shouldn't cling to past relationships that he himself neglected. She questions him relentlessly, asking if he ever tried to contact Himeno or Naruse after high school. Miyagi asks if he feels that clinging to the past now is asking for too much. Kusunoki is left speechless, wondering what he even has left to cling to. He feels trapped as they arrive at a desolate train station, with both his past and his future shut off from him. Looking at the train schedule, Kusunoki realizes in dismay that they've missed the last train. He sighs in frustration, slumping onto a bench. Miyagi calmly accepts the situation, telling him they'll have to spend the night at the station. Kusunoki gets a canned coffee from a vending machine. He takes a drink, a silent tension filling the air between them. Miyagi waits quietly on a bench inside the station. She yawns as the long night begins. While Miyagi stretches on the bench, Kusunoki watches her. He reflects on a dark and sudden impulse he just had. He admits to himself that he had an urge to do something terrible to her. He decides to ask Miyagi a question. He wants to know how much of a time lag there is between an observer witnessing an inappropriate act and the subject's lifespan being terminated. She asks him why he wants to know. He states it plainly. He wants to know how long he would have before being killed if he were to get violent with her. Miyagi explains that contact with her superiors would be instant and escape would be impossible. Kusunoki calculates this means he would have over 10 minutes to act freely. Miyagi coldly tells him that nobody said anything like that. Kusunoki's hand hovers near Miyagi's shoulder as he wrestles with his thoughts. He questions if he was really about to push her down and use her to fulfill his desires. He imagines injuring her, adding another wound like the scar on her knee. He thinks about taking even more light from her dark eyes. He pictures her after it was all over, being completely unfazed and simply asking with sarcasm if he was satisfied. Kusunoki puts his hand on Miyagi's shoulder, then lets it go. He steps back, the moment of tension passing. They return to sitting on opposite ends of the bench in silence. Kusunoki breaks the silence, remarking that being an observer must be a nasty job. He considers how often she must deal with people like him, and she says his understanding is appreciated. He imagines there's no shortage of people who go crazy before they die and take it out on their observer. Miyagi reveals that he is an easy case compared to others. When Kusunoki asks why she would take such a job, she gives a simple answer: she had to. He asks for the full story. She seems surprised he'd be interested in anyone other than Himeno. Kusunoki insists that's not true, saying he wouldn't have had his earlier dark thoughts if he didn't see any charm in her. Miyagi decides to open up, saying she has nothing to hide. She reveals that she sold roughly 30 years of her time. Miyagi explains that most observers are people like him who chose to sell their time. Kusunoki calculates that she'll be free in her 40s, but she adds grimly that it's only if she survives. He asks why she needed the money so badly. She warns him the story isn't very interesting, but he doesn't press further. As they wait for the morning train, Miyagi decides to tell him her story. She recalls being only 6 years old when her mother became an observer and vanished from her life. She doesn't understand why her mother sold decades of her time, only that she was always dissatisfied with her reality. Miyagi admits she hated her miserable mother, who in turn hated her. When Miyagi was 10, her mother died. It's clear she was killed by a subject she was observing. Kusunoki reflects that extending one's lifespan offers no protection from injury or illness. The man who informed her of her mother's death also told her she had a debt. Her mother had left behind an enormous debt that she now had to pay. He presented the young Miyagi with 3 options: sell her lifespan, her health, or her time. Kusunoki understands now that she chose to sell her time, which led her to her current life as an observer. Miyagi reflects that while the work is lonely and dangerous, it has given her insight into the value of life. Kusunoki doesn't get it, saying he'd rather just sell off a life like that entirely. He calls the prospect of starting over at 40 a tragedy. Miyagi agrees, saying it would be better to sell a lifespan that wasn't worth anything in the first place. When Kusunoki asks what her life is worth, she smiles faintly and tells him it's the same as his. 10,000 yen per year. Miyagi apologizes for being harsh, explaining she sees a reflection of herself in him. Kusunoki remarks that this seems like even more reason to just die, since it means there's nothing to look forward to. To his surprise, Miyagi smiles and agrees that he is absolutely right. She admits she takes after her mother, clinging to hope despite everything. She calls herself an irreconcilable fool, compelled to survive despite seeing no point in living. She asks if he doesn't also think that maybe something good will happen someday. Kusunoki replies that he knew a guy who died with that hope and got nothing. Miyagi sadly says she does too. After a moment of silence, Kusunoki laughs weakly and pulls out a cigarette. Miyagi walks over and takes a cigarette from his pack. She takes the lighter from his hand, getting it to spark on the first try. He tries to light it, but his lighter keeps failing. Miyagi lights her own cigarette. Instead of giving the lighter back, she leans in close and uses her cigarette to light his. Their cigarettes touch in a quiet moment of connection. They sit and smoke in comfortable silence. Seeing Miyagi looking relaxed for the very first time, Kusunoki makes a quiet resolution. He decides that he will at least have her remember him as the easiest subject she's ever had to be around. Finally, on the morning train, Kusunoki breaks the silence. He asks Miyagi if she knows what Hymena's life is like now, and if she could tell him. Miyagi warns him that the truth will be harsh, but he insists that he still wants to know. Understanding, she agrees to tell him. Miyagi prepares to recount the story of Hymena's life over the 10 years they've been apart. Kusunoki recalls his childhood with Hymeno, waiting for a promised something that would happen in the summer. They believed that in 10 years, something wonderful would happen that would make them feel glad to have lived, validating their existence. He dreamed they would become so rich and famous that their classmates would be consumed by jealousy, a future that would make up for everything. He remembers a younger Hymeno saying that if their dreams didn't come true, it wouldn't be worth it. Miyagi's voice brings him back to the present, explaining that circumstances led Hymeno to have a child at 17. She dropped out of high school, married at 18, but divorced 2 years later and is now raising the child alone at 20. Miyagi concludes her grim report with the final detail. In 2 years, Hymeno is predicted to jump to her death. Miyagi finds him folding paper cranes and asks if he's making 1,000. Miyagi questions his purpose, and he explains it's a way to wish himself a happy life as he heads toward death. He found he enjoyed the repetitive work, filling his drab apartment with colorful cranes. Kusunoki counts the finished cranes, the number climbing into the high hundreds. While recounting them, he is surprised to find many that are too well made to be his own. He realizes that Miyagi must have been folding them while he slept. He remarks to himself that the task was finished far too quickly. That night after finishing the cranes, Kusunoki checks the pockets of his jeans. He finds the letter he had taken from the time capsule. It begins with a plea to his future self, stating that he is the only one he can count on. The letter from his younger self urges him to meet Hyuno, explaining that they are both hopeless without each other. Miyagi, reading over his shoulder, remarks that his 10-year-ago self was surprisingly kind. When she asks what he plans to do, Kusunoki states his intention is to go meet Hyuno. He tells her it's a request from himself from 10 years ago, and he intends to honor it. Miyagi warns that it might just bring him more pain, but Kusunoki is resolute, saying he can't give up until he sees her with his own eyes. He wants to talk with her one last time, and give her the 300,000 yen from selling his lifespan as a thank you. Miyagi tells him she won't stop him, admitting she understands the feeling. Kusunoki decides to go to Hyuno's house, asking Miyagi if she knows where her parents live. Miyagi confirms she does. Kusunoki is startled by a memory of Miyagi, telling him not to bring up Hyuno's name so lightly. He thanks her for the information. She tells him not to mention it. Kusunoki prepares his motorcycle for the trip. Miyagi stops him, explaining she can't let him go too far on his own. She reminds him of the rule: an observer and their target must not be separated by more than 100 meters. When he asks what would happen, she states plainly that his lifespan would be terminated. Kusunoki realizes his bike can seat two, so they'll be able to use it. Miyagi says she isn't opposed to riding with him, and Kusunoki assures her it won't be a bother. He starts the engine, ready for their journey. Miyagi gets on the bike behind Kusunoki. They ride off together through the streets. He tells her he'll stop by the college campus first to get a map. Miyagi asks if he knows Hyuno's address, and he confirms that he does. As they ride, Kusunoki explains that he once received a letter from Hyuno. She wrote about being busy with her studies, with no hint of her usual sarcasm. He thought it didn't sound like her at all. He replied with a similarly banal letter, but never got a response. He reflects that by the time she sent that letter, Hyuno was already pregnant. Still, he's glad for it now because it told him where she was. They arrive at the college campus. Kusunoki goes to the library to make a copy of the map. While taking a break, Kusunoki asks Miyagi how she would spend her last few months if she were in his situation. Miyagi thoughtfully replies that she wouldn't know until she was actually in that position. She then glances around nervously, reminding him that he shouldn't talk to her in public places like this. Kusunoki dismisses her concern, saying people will just think he's a strange guy talking to himself, which he is. He recalls actively wanting to be seen as weird, believing it was better than not being remembered at all. After a moment, Miyagi reconsiders his question. She says if she only had a few months left, there are 3 things she would absolutely want to do. Miyagi lists her 3 final wishes: to go to a certain lake to make a grave for herself, and to see a person who was important to her. Kusunoki asks for more details about the lake. She explains it's just a lake, but she remembers the view of the stars there from her childhood being beautiful. Of all the sights she knows, she says, that starry lake is the most beautiful. Kusunoki then asks about the grave. Miyagi clarifies she wouldn't buy land, she'd just find a nice, large rock. She explains that what's important is that it remains for a few decades. When he inquires about the important person, she declines to tell him. He guesses it's a guy, and she concedes that his assumption would be right. Miyagi admits that despite the potential for pain and disappointment, she would ultimately still go to meet this important person. Because of this, she feels she has no right to deny what Kusunoki is doing. He observes that she seems much more timid when it concerns her own future, and she replies that she knows nothing about it. They finally arrive at a house with a nameplate that reads Hyuno. Kusunoki confirms with Miyagi that this must be the place, as there are no other houses with that name around. He takes a breath and rings the doorbell. They wait, but there is no answer. With no one home, Kusunoki decides they should waste some time, hoping someone will return at night. They go to a nearby library. As he browses the shelves, Kusunoki wonders what kind of book a person would want to read when nearing death. He pulls a book from the shelf, questioning what could possibly be useful at such a time. As it turns out, his selections are not particularly interesting. While he's reading, Miyagi quietly slides into the seat next to him. She asks if he wants to try observing and reading at the same time. He agrees that it's something like that. It's the first time Kusunoki has ever read a book with someone else. He finds himself thinking not just about his own feelings, but also about how Miyagi might be feeling, which makes for a more enriching experience. Leaning closer, he notices she has a calming smell. They return to Hyuno's house, but it's still empty. They wait outside, but no one comes. As day turns to night, the streetlights flicker on. Kusunoki takes a drag from a cigarette. He decides they'll have to try again tomorrow. Riding back on the motorcycle, its headlight cuts through the darkness. He notices lanterns lining the street. He asks Miyagi if she's going to the festival at the nearby shrine and suggests they drop by. They arrive at the bustling festival. Kusunoki realizes he hasn't been to one in 10 years. He hadn't attended the local one ever since Hyuno left. He buys a large amount of food, and when Miyagi asks why, he admits he doesn't know. Kusunoki tells Miyagi there's no way he can eat all the food by himself, so she'll have to help. She silently agrees and they sit together, eating festival food. Afterwards, Kusunoki leans back, full and content, remarking that going for a full tour of the stalls was too much. As they sit under the night sky, Kusunoki recalls the past. He remembers Hyuno's premonition that something good would happen in the summer, 10 years later. She had even suggested that if they were both still single after 10 years, they should marry each other. Kusunoki reflects that it is now that summer. But their childhood promise had not come to pass. One of them had become used goods, while the other was ending a life unfit to sell. He wonders where Hyuno is now and what she's doing. As they sit quietly at the festival, Miyagi continues to write in her notebook while Kusunoki looks on. He walks up a set of stairs at the shrine, a familiar figure at the top. He thinks about how some things are said to be too good to be true. And yet he muses, in reality, things sometimes do come together in a perverse, prankster-like way. Things do come together. He remembers running through the festival with her as a child. He looks up at the shrine, the place of their memories. He is breathless, unable to speak for a moment. He finally finds his voice and says her name, Hyuno. She turns her eyes wide with surprise and recognizes him, Kusunoki. He can barely recall the specifics of their conversation after they were reunited. Kusunoki reflects that his excitement likely led him to talk without thinking. But the details of the conversation didn't matter. All he needed was to say something and have Hyuno respond. It turned out she was just passing through for work and hadn't come to see the festival. Hyuno apologizes, saying she would love to talk longer but has to get up early. Kusunoki suggests they go for a drink sometime soon. She tells him that alcohol is no good, but a meal would be fine. He readily agrees to her counteroffer. After promising to meet for dinner in 2 days, they parted ways. Miyagi remarks that it was nice, and that she hadn't expected things to go so well. Kusunoki agrees, admitting that it all seems too good to be true. Miyagi replies that sometimes it is true. With one of his final wishes now within reach, Kusunoki crosses, "Tell Hyuno how I feel" off his list. He turns to Miyagi and tells her he has a strange request for her. Miyagi asks how she can prepare him, and he explains he wants her help preparing for Hyuno tomorrow. Knowing it's pointless to hide anything from her, Kusunoki decides to be honest, admitting he's never really interacted with a girl in 20 years. He worries that he will bore Hyuno and mess things up, so he wants to go into town the next day to rehearse. Miyagi understands his request, asking if he wants her to play the part of Ms. Hyuno. Kusunoki confirms her suspicion and asks if she will accept. Miyagi points out potential issues, but he doesn't mind them. She agrees, saying it's not a problem and that she shouldn't care what other people think. Kusunoki explains that all that matters to him is that Hyuno thinks well of him, even if everyone else ridicules him. Miyagi observes that Kusunoki becomes like a different person when the topic is Hyuno. She voices her concern that she may be an inadequate substitute, but Kusunoki assures her it's no problem. Kusunoki reassures her, saying that from his perspective she isn't so different from other girls, except for being a little cuter. After a moment of thought, Miyagi formally agrees to his request. Their rehearsal begins with a trip to a clothing store. Kusunoki heads into a changing room to try on some new clothes. Miyagi advises him that he doesn't need to wear anything too fancy, just something that comes off as clean. He playfully asks if he can interpret that as her saying he'd look good in anything, and she tells him he is free to interpret it as he wishes. Miyagi calls it a compliment but tells him there is no need to voice every thought. Kusunoki decides to interpret it as he pleases. After leaving the store, they head to a salon. He sits down for a haircut, telling the beautician that he is meeting someone important the next day. As Miyagi advised, the beautician gives him a passionate haircut and offers tips for his important meeting. Miyagi is taken aback by his transformation, commenting that he looks like a different person. Over a meal, Kusunoki jokes that he certainly doesn't look like someone whose life is only worth 10,000 yen a year, and Miyagi agrees. Miyagi tells him he looks like someone with the promise of a happy future. Kusunoki thanks her and returns the compliment, saying that when she smiles, she looks like a fairy of the library. She observes that he seems rather chipper today. She questions his strange compliment, which he clarifies was meant to describe a graceful and intelligent woman. Miyagi tells him to save the line for Himeno, but Kusunoki clarifies he was talking about her. She quietly thanks him. He then muses that of course in reality, both he and Miyagi are worth next to nothing as people, a strange thing to say. As part of the rehearsal, Kusunoki takes Miyagi's hand. She looks up at him, surprised by the sudden contact. They continue walking along the path, hand in hand. Miyagi tells him to try and seduce her, pretending she is Himeno. He agrees. Kusunoki tells her that seeing her was the best thing to ever happen in his life, and losing sight of her was the worst. He adds that now, depending on her reply, he might have a new best or worst moment. Miyagi seems impressed, calling it a smooth delivery for a roundabout pickup line. Kusunoki then asks how she thinks Himeno would reply to such a line. Miyagi thinks Himeno would probably dismiss it as nonsense and laugh it off. Kusunoki then turns the question around, asking what Miyagi's response would be. She says she doesn't understand his meaning, and he tells her not to worry about it, calling it a joke. She seems unconvinced, questioning if he is truly the kind of person to make jokes. He admits he isn't sure himself, explaining that he doesn't put much trust in fixed concepts like personality or character. He believes those things all change, depending on the situation. He adds that people put too much faith in consistency, but it might be more superficial than they think. Miyagi is surprised to hear him say that, noting that everyone likes to think they are the exception when it comes to depressing statistics. Miyagi agrees that his point is true. When they tire of walking, they board a bus. Even with other passengers around, Kusunoki keeps talking to Miyagi about his memories of Himeno. The bus brings them to a scenic overlook where other couples are enjoying the view. Kusunoki tells Miyagi that the very first time he came to this place, Himeno was with him. He recalls how the railing at the top of the spiral stairs was the perfect height to tempt a child, and Himeno tried to climb it. He noticed a dangerous gap, just as she was about to fall all the way to the ground. He reflects that if he hadn't been there to grab her, she might have been seriously hurt. He tells Miyagi that Himeno acts intellectual but can be a real goof, the kind of person you can't leave alone. He remembers getting a scrape in his hurry to save her, and for that one day she was unusually nice to him. He believes that at that point she knew more than he did. She had yet to tell him something crucial. He thinks that she chose not to speak of it, perhaps wanting to let him keep dreaming for as long as possible. It's pouring rain on the day of his meeting with Himeno. Kusunoki waits patiently under a covered walkway, holding an umbrella. He recalls their agreement to meet outside the bookstore at 5. He checks his watch. He tells himself it's okay and that there's no rush. He continues to wait patiently. Finally, he hears someone call his name. He turns to see Himeno approaching, waving to him. He thinks to himself that even if he hadn't been waiting 10 years to see her, he still would have found her radiant. Himeno apologizes for her lateness, blaming the rain, and offers to treat him to something. He tells her not to worry about it for today, insisting that he will pay. She asks if this means he is expecting a next time, and he confirms that he is. He adds that next time, he'll probably be expecting one after that as well. Himeno smiles, saying she's glad he is being honest. He reflects that this is just the sort of thing Himeno would say. He thinks that even as a 10-year-old, though she was sarcastic, she always spoke with a hint of warmth. Standing at the entrance to the subway, Kusunoki opens his umbrella. Himeno fondly recalls that he was always the one who forgot his umbrella, meaning she had to reluctantly share hers. Kusunoki agrees that she is right. He suggests that it would be good to reverse their roles from now on. She asks him what he was doing at the shrine the other day. He claims he was looking for her. She calls him a liar, but he laughingly insists that it's true. Walking together in the rain, Kusunoki felt that things were going great, believing he was expressing his affection and that she was reciprocating. He didn't want to know what Himeno was truly thinking deep down. At an Italian restaurant, Kusunoki and Himeno sit down for their long-awaited dinner. Himeno says she wants to know what Kusunoki has been up to over the years. He tries to deflect, suggesting she go first. She insists, wanting to start with him. Kusunoki prefaces his story by saying it will not be very interesting. He quickly summarizes his life. His academic abilities peaked in middle school, and he attended a good high school but ended up in an average college. He adds that he stopped painting when he was 17. He concludes that there was hardly anything worth talking about, finishing his life story in under 5 minutes. Himeno expresses her disappointment that he gave up art. She confesses that she personally loved his pictures. She recalls how effortlessly he created beautiful, breathtaking drawings, something she felt she could never achieve. She admits that, without him knowing, she would sometimes take his pictures home just to stare at them. Kusunoki is surprised, remarking that she never said anything like that back then, while Himeno explains she was antagonistic toward him. Kusunoki admits he felt the same way, jealous that despite their similar grades, adults always praised the pretty little Himeno. He found it unfair that one person could be so capable and beautiful. Himeno then reveals something unexpected: she dropped out of high school. Kusunoki is shocked by the news, and Himeno realizes he truly didn't know. She prepares to tell him her own story. As Himeno recounts the events that led to her dropping out, Kusunoki notes that she omits the part about her pregnancy. Himeno describes herself as childish, unable to stand the slightest imperfection, which led her to mess things up. She feels she hasn't changed at all since the summer she left 10 years ago. She reflects on her past, believing she was a smart girl 10 years ago. However, she thinks this led to a foolish pride, a notion that she didn't need to mature any further. As a result, she feels she is still the same 10-year-old dreamer, stuck in place while everyone else keeps changing. Turning the conversation back to him, Himeno asks Kusunoki how he has changed in the last 10 years. The question makes him sweat and he falls silent, unable to answer. Kusunoki finally responds, telling Himeno that she is not the only one who has not changed. He claims that since they parted, he has not changed one bit either, and it is at this moment that he begins to lose his composure. He knew how his words would sound to her, a confession of years spent in pointless, lonely disappointment. He understood how foolish it was to say this, feeling as if he were already half dead. But that realization would not stop him from telling her what he did just a few days ago. Kusunoki looks at Himeno and makes a shocking confession: he sold his lifespan for 10,000 yen per year. Himeno listens with a calm, unreadable expression. He lets everything out at once, jumping from topic to topic. He explains about the shop that deals in lifespan, and how he sold all but 3 months of his life. He tells Himeno that even though she cannot see her, his invisible observer is here right now. Kusunoki gestures to the empty space beside him, explaining that his observer is a girl named Miyagi. Himeno interrupts him. Without meaning offense, she asks if he has any idea how completely unreal his story sounds. Kusunoki admits that he knows how ridiculous it sounds. Himeno agrees that it is ridiculous. Yet she trails off, looking at him thoughtfully as she considers his words. To his surprise, Himeno says she cannot believe he is lying. She believes his story about having little time left and being watched by an observer. She explains that they have known each other long enough for her to know instantly if he were trying to deceive her. She concludes that while it is hard to swallow, she can believe he is not lying about selling his lifespan. She apologizes for making him go first and confesses that she has been hiding something from him as well. Just as she is about to continue, Himeno coughs into a napkin. She excuses herself, suggesting they can continue their conversation after dinner. Kusunoki waits as she walks away. Their food arrives, but Himeno is still gone. He asks Miyagi to check the lady's room, concerned that something might have happened to Himeno. Miyagi goes to check for her. But Himeno never came back. Kusunoki searched the restaurant, but Himeno was nowhere to be found. Defeated, he returns to his seat. Miyagi appears at the table. She begins to eat the cold pasta. Miyagi remarks that the pasta is quite tasty, even cold. Kusunoki asks for her honest opinion on why Himeno left. Miyagi suggests that perhaps Himeno thought he was insane. However, Kusunoki knew the truth was more complicated and that Miyagi knew it too, but was hiding it for his sake. As Kusunoki stands to leave, the waiter approaches him with a note from Himeno. Reading it, Kusunoki turns to Miyagi, realizing she knew about this and kept it from him. She apologizes, but he tells her there is no need, thanking her for letting him have his good dream. Kusunoki asks Miyagi if, in his original life, Himeno would have succeeded in her objective. Miyagi confirms this, explaining that Himeno would have done it right in front of him. The note's purpose was to show him her true failings and clear up years of resentment. The letter reveals Hymno's shocking intention. She had planned to die right in front of him, her one and only childhood friend. She writes that she had always despised him and planned her revenge for years. However, after hearing his story, she concluded that revenge would be pointless now and decided to simply vanish instead. The letter ends with a cold goodbye and a hope that his story about having little time left to live is true. Crushed, Kusunoki calls himself a fool. He realizes he had lived his whole life alone precisely to avoid feeling this way. He folds the letter into a paper airplane. He thinks to himself that he should have just trusted in his own way to the end. He lets the paper airplane fly, watching it glide down and land in the water below. He then takes out the money Hymno left for the meal. Standing on the bridge with Miyagi, Kusunoki throws the wad of cash into the air, letting the bills scatter into the wind and float down towards the river. He watches silently as the money flutters down. Miyagi stands beside him, her expression somber. The bills scatter across the water, a meaningless gesture against the backdrop of the city. As it begins to rain, Miyagi warns Kusunoki that he will get drenched. He replies that he is in the mood to get drenched. Miyagi simply accepts his answer. Kusunoki tells Miyagi that she does not have to get wet. In response, she closes her umbrella and smiles faintly, saying that she too is in a getting drenched mood. Together, they walk on into the downpour. Seeking refuge from the pouring rain, Kusunoki and Miyagi huddled under an isolated bus stop. Kusunoki glanced over at his observer, noticing how she hugged her knees in a desperate attempt to stay warm and get some sleep. Feeling a pang of guilt for dragging her into his own selfish misery, Kusunoki quietly stood up. He wandered the area until he found an empty community center. Then returned to gently scoop Miyagi into his arms, careful not to wake her. He knew full well that a light sleeper like Miyagi would have woken up instantly, meaning she had been feigning sleep the entire time. As they laid down on the tatami mats, Kusunoki wondered if this quiet comfort was just a fleeting, desperate dream born from his own despondency. The illusion of peace didn't last long. Kusunoki stirred, immediately recognizing Miyagi's presence by her distinct scent, which reminded him of a crisp winter morning even in the dead of summer. Through the heavy drumming of the rain, Miyagi seemed to whisper something as she gently stroked his hair, though the words were lost to him. Drifting back to sleep, Kusunoki pondered just how cornered he would feel if she weren't there to support him. He quickly reminded himself not to burden her any further, convincing himself that her kindness was merely a byproduct of his impending death. In the quiet darkness, Kusunoki secretly vowed to return to his modest, solitary life and expire silently, like a cat slipping away unseen. The following morning, after a grueling 4-hour trek from the community center, they finally arrived back at his apartment. Drenched in sweat and nursing blistered feet, Kusunoki immediately headed for the bathroom. He initially offered to let Miyagi shower first, but quickly realized she would refuse. Her strict rules dictated that she was only free to eat and bathe, while her observer was asleep, prompting Kusunoki to lie down and shut his eyes. Miyagi saw right through his act, politely asking if he was actually asleep. Caught in his lie, Kusunoki admitted he was feigning it for her sake, to which Miyagi coolly replied that she would gladly take him up on the offer and use the shower. While she bathed, Kusunoki experimented with sitting against the wall, imitating how Miyagi usually slept, but found it impossible to drift off. When she emerged and questioned his ridiculous posture, he deflected, telling her she should be the one using the bed. Though she stubbornly insisted, she was used to the floor. Compromising, Kusunoki declared he would sleep on the left side of the mattress from now on, leaving the right side open for her. Miyagi assured him she wouldn't intrude on his space regardless, leaving the choice entirely up to him. Despite her initial hesitation, the quiet invitation hung in the air. Eventually, Miyagi relented, silently laying down on the right side of the mattress beside the sleeping Kusunoki. When morning came, Kusunoki woke to find Miyagi already sitting up. She quickly brushed off the shared space, claiming she had merely been exhausted and would return to her usual spot on the floor from tomorrow on. Later that day, Kusunoki visited an ATM to withdraw the very last of his part-time job savings. Standing on a pedestrian bridge, he turned to Miyagi and offered a sincere word of thanks. Over a modest meal, Kusunoki confessed that he had already exhausted his short bucket list and was running out of things to do. Miyagi suggested he simply indulge in a hobby, prompting him to realize that his past interests, like music and reading, were merely coping mechanisms to force himself to keep living, a need he no longer had. Miyagi pressed him to find something simpler to appreciate, listing off oddly specific pastimes like counting railroad ties or playing ancient arcade cabinets. Kusunoki easily guessed that these were the peculiar habits of her past observes, which she fondly described as rather nice ways to pass the time. Noticing the diner owner casting suspicious glances at him for seemingly talking to thin air, Miyagi suggested they continue the conversation back at the apartment. Once home, she shared more anecdotes about her past assignments, and Kusunoki found that no matter how pointless the stories were, her voice made them feel incredibly warm and soothing. The next day, as they sat together folding the remaining origami paper into cranes, Kusunoki pondered his next move. He admitted to himself that simply keeping on like this, drowning in paper cranes with her, wouldn't be such a bad way to go. Miyagi playfully dropped the folded cranes onto his chest as he lay on the floor, the two of them whiling away the quiet hours. But eventually, Kusunoki's gaze drifted outward, settling on a row of brightly lit vending machines down the street. Taking a drag from his cigarette, a sudden realization hit him. He turned to Miyagi and declared that he had finally remembered something he genuinely liked. He loved vending machines. Miyagi stared at him in utter confusion as he explained that ever since he was a child, he had harbored a bizarre dream of becoming a vending machine. He pointed to the glowing drink dispensers, confirming that those were exactly the kind of machines he meant. He excitedly rattled off the sheer variety of things they provided, from drinks and ice cream to hot udon and cigarettes, marveling at how Japan was the land of vending machines. Miyagi bluntly called it a stupid, unique hobby, but Kusunoki didn't mind, admitting he just loved looking at them. He tried to articulate the appeal, explaining that vending machines offered a clear function and a comforting sense of permanence. They simply provided what was needed and always offered a little warmth. Miyagi smiled, noting that vending machines were especially important to observers like her because they never ignored them. When Miyagi asked what he actually planned to do with this newfound appreciation, Kusunoki brought up a character from Paul Auster's Smoke. He wanted to imitate the cigar shop owner who took a photo of the same spot every morning, aiming to capture images that seemed entirely meaningless at a glance. His grand plan was simply to take crude, ordinary photos of everyday vending machines, a task anyone could do. To his surprise, Miyagi smiled and admitted that she actually liked that idea, marking the beginning of Kusunoki's vending machine photography tour. Whenever he snapped a picture, he made sure to capture the surrounding environment as well, documenting the condition and the specific area each machine inhabited. It was a fresh, exciting experience, allowing him to discover countless machines he had blindly walked past 100 times before. At the start of each day, he would drop off his film at the local photo studio, enjoying breakfast while he waited, and then spend the evening carefully organizing the developed prints into an album. One day, the studio owner caught Kusunoki laughing and chatting with the invisible Miyagi and curiously asked if someone was there with him. Kusunoki casually introduced Miyagi as his observer, a fact the owner readily accepted without batting an eye. However, the owner's face betrayed his complete lack of understanding when he looked at the photos. He assumed the bizarre shots of vending machines were somehow artistic portraits of this invisible girl. Kusunoki didn't bother correcting the man's misunderstanding. As he snapped a photo of Miyagi standing next to a parked motorbike, he embraced the fact that his pictures would only ever appear as meaningless junk to anyone else. He found comfort in the fact that people like the studio owner were in the minority. He was perfectly content, even when the man living next door shot him a look of absolute disgust as he talked to thin air in the hallway. And he truly didn't care what anybody else thought of his eccentric behavior. Kusunoki and Miyagi rode the scooter through an unfamiliar area on a clear, still day. After wandering aimlessly for 2 hours, Kusunoki recognized their surroundings, realizing his instincts had subconsciously guided him back to his hometown. They pulled up to an old, shuttered building that Kusunoki identified as his childhood candy store, noting that the vintage vending machine out front was the very first one he had ever visited. He pulled out his camera and snapped a photo of it. Taking a break at a nearby park, the two sat on a bench to eat some rice balls. When a pair of stray cats approached them, Kusunoki curiously asked if the animals could see his invisible companion. Miyagi confirmed that cats and dogs could indeed see her, though she dryly noted that it didn't mean they actually liked her. As the cats quickly scattered when she walked past, Kusunoki watched as she sat nearby, quietly sketching in her notebook. Noticing her drawing, Kusunoki bluntly pointed out that she wasn't very skilled at it. Miyagi playfully shot back that this was exactly why she was practicing, prompting Kusunoki to ask if he could see the rest of her artwork before they moved on. Later that afternoon, as they headed toward the next town, Kusunoki passed by the old candy store once more. This time he spotted an elderly woman sitting on the bench out front, and stopped to greet her. He acknowledged that it had been a decade since his last visit, and assumed the old woman wouldn't remember him. However, he warmly assured her that he remembered her perfectly. He recalled a night from when he was 8 or 9 years old, having run away from home after a heated argument with his mother. He had gone to the candy store to kill time, and when the old woman asked if he needed to head home, he had stubbornly talked back to her. Despite his attitude, she had let him stay. A few hours later, when his parents called the store looking for him, Kusunoki remembered how the old woman had calmly covered for him, telling them he hadn't arrived yet. He expressed his gratitude for that night, explaining that her small act of kindness had allowed him to hold on to his deepest hopes and put his trust in others. Kusunoki then brought up his childhood friend, Hyuno, assuming the old woman had forgotten her as well. He explained that he and Hyuno were the black sheep of their school, finding solace in each other's company during their frequent visits to the store. He confessed that he had spent 10 years clinging to a childhood promise they made to get together if they were both single at 20. However, Hyuno had moved away and changed schools during their 4th grade summer. He recalled a letter she had sent him when he was 17, finally understanding years later that it had been a desperate cry for help. Feeling cornered by her past, she had reached out to her only childhood friend for salvation. He explained that the letter hadn't been in their time capsule. Hyuno had dug it up early to send to him. Kusunoki carried the heavy guilt of failing to recognize her play, admitting that losing her had left him completely hollow. Having finished his solemn tale, he apologized to the old woman for making her sit through such a gloomy story. With his past finally aired out, Kusunoki offered the old woman a polite farewell, and thanked her for listening before he and Miyagi took their leave. Back on the scooter, Kusunoki suddenly remembered the road they were traveling on. He excitedly told Miyagi that he had been down this path long before his life took its current tragic turn. He explained that following the road and making a specific turn would lead them straight to Starry Lake, the very place he had told her he wanted to visit before his time ran out. They rode through the darkening forest until they reached the lake's edge. Parking the scooter, they walked out toward the water as the evening settled in around them. Wanting to ensure he saw the stars in the best possible conditions, Miyagi instructed Kusunoki to close his eyes. She promised to guide him by the hand until they reached the perfect viewing spot. As she led him blindly through the dark, Kusunoki jokingly asked what would happen if she deceived him and led him somewhere dangerous. Miyagi flatly denied having any such intentions, guiding him to a stop and instructing him to lie down flat on his back before opening his eyes. Opening his eyes, Kusunoki was greeted by a breathtaking view of the brilliant, starry sky stretching endlessly over the quiet lake. They lay on the wooden dock for a long time, soaking in the view. Kusunoki realized that Miyagi had lied to spare his feelings regarding Hyuno, and he confessed that he finally understood why Miyagi had wanted to see her own special person before she died. Miyagi gently agreed, revealing that she too had a childhood friend who meant the world to her, drawing a quiet parallel between her past and Kusunoki's bond with Hyuno. She shared her own tragic realization, explaining that she and her friend had relied entirely on each other. However, when she used her first day off as an observer to check on him, she found that he had seamlessly adapted to a life without her in mere weeks. Miyagi confessed her bitter truth: she had only ever been a shackle to him. She admitted to feeling a dark, selfish desire for him to despair over her absence, deeply hurt by the realization that he could easily survive on his own. Kusunoki asked if she still wanted to see him despite the pain it caused. Miyagi admitted she hadn't gone back to see him since, clinging to her memories because she had nothing else left, which was why she understood Kusunoki's lingering attachment so well. She empathized with his pain, though she worried he might not want her pity. Kusunoki simply thanked her for understanding, finding a quiet comfort in their shared heartbreak. Later that night, back at the apartment, Miyagi quickly dove into bed, blaming her sudden exhaustion on the long day. Kusunoki stole a glance at her, secretly wishing on a shooting star that their peaceful, intertwined days could just continue forever. However, when Kusunoki woke up the following morning, the apartment was empty. Miyagi was completely gone. leaving nothing behind but a notebook resting silently by the bed. Kusunoki recalled his initial thoughts about Miyagi's arrival, musing that if his observer had been unpleasant, he might have felt more at ease. As fate would have it, the man now standing in for Miyagi was exactly that. Kusunoki found the man sitting in his apartment and immediately asked where Miyagi was. The substitute observer explained that she was on break and he would be filling in for today and tomorrow. Kusunoki confirmed that things would be back to normal after her 2-day break. The man affirmed that was the plan. Kusunoki noted that even observers get days off. The man retorted that, unlike Kusunoki, they still had a lot of living to do. Kusunoki expressed that this was a relief. The substitute sighed at how Kusunoki was spending the last of his life, calling it stupid. Kusunoki quietly agreed with him. The substitute observer suddenly asked if Kusunoki was causing Miyagi any trouble. Kusunoki guessed that the man must be friendly with her, but clarified that their interactions were limited. The observer looked at him with disdain, remarking that Miyagi was a poor girl. He added that he truly pitied her. Kusunoki admitted that he had indeed troubled Miyagi, recounting how he'd said hurtful things and even came close to physically harming her. The substitute observer reacted with shock. Angrily, he demanded to know why Kusunoki would do such a thing. In response, Kusunoki handed him a document telling him he would find all the details there. Kusunoki explained that it was Miyagi's observation log, which a subject probably shouldn't be reading. After reading the log, the substitute's aggressive demeanor softened considerably. Kusunoki surmised that whatever was inside, Miyagi must have written favorably about him. The man then changed the subject, asking what Kusunoki had used his money for. Kusunoki asked if the log didn't mention it, but the observer admitted he hadn't read it in detail. Kusunoki explained that he scattered the money from a bridge, finding the sight of it fluttering in the wind rather nice. He laughed, finding the situation funny. The observer called him a moron. Kusunoki agreed that more good could have been done with the money. The observer then leaned in, asking if Kusunoki had seriously believed his lifespan was only worth 300,000 yen. Confused, Kusunoki asked what he meant, admitting that he did think the amount was low at first. The observer simply laughed. He told Kusunoki to ask Miyagi about the true value of his lifespan when he saw her next. His words left Kusunoki unable to sleep, pondering their meaning in the darkness. The next day, Miyagi returned, greeting Kusunoki with a cheerful good morning. She asked what his plans were for the day. He replied that they would stick to their usual routine of touring vending machines. The two then set off on his scooter, riding along a country road. After spending the day together on the scooter, they began walking down a quiet path as evening fell. Miyagi asked where they were headed. Kusunoki playfully asked what she would do if he deceived her and took her somewhere outrageous. Smiling, Miyagi inferred that he must be taking her somewhere with a beautiful sight. He led her to a clearing by the water, where the trees and tall grass were filled with the gentle, glowing lights of countless fireflies under a starry night sky. Miyagi was captivated by the sight. Kusunoki asked if he could interpret this beautiful scene as her way of thanking him for their night at the lake. Miyagi understood, smiling as she said she would interpret it very freely, but Kusunoki told her she didn't need to narrate her thoughts to him. As Miyagi watched a firefly rest in her hand, Kusunoki called her name. She turned to him, asking what was wrong. He looked at her seriously and asked why she had lied. Miyagi feigned ignorance. Kusunoki simplified his question. Was his lifespan really worth 300,000 yen? Miyagi insisted that it was, stating that his worth wasn't very much. Kusunoki admitted he had believed that until the previous night. Realizing he'd spoken to her substitute, Miyagi fell silent. Kusunoki explained that when he first heard she'd lied, he thought she had simply taken a cut of the money for herself. But he couldn't bring himself to believe she would fool him like that from the very beginning. He pondered it all night, realizing he had made a critical mistake in assuming that 10,000 yen a year was the lowest possible price. He then asked her the real question: why did she decide to give 300,000 yen to a complete stranger? Miyagi tried to feign ignorance again, but Kusunoki told her it was all right. He simply wanted to say thank you. After a moment, Miyagi softly replied that it was all right. Kusunoki asked what his life was truly worth. They sat together in silence for a moment. Miyagi quietly answered 30 yen. Kusunoki processed this, equating it to a 3-minute phone call. He then apologized for how he used her 300,000 yen, but she replied that she only wished he had used it more for himself. Miyagi explained that she understood his feelings, suggesting that their motivations were the same at their core. Feeling lonely, sad, and hollow, she had turned to a desperate act of altruism. Kusunoki considered that if she had told him the truth from the start, he might not have sold his lifespan at all. Miyagi agreed, apologizing for her meddling, as it meant he could have lived a longer life. Kusunoki disagreed, saying that if she'd told him he was only worth 30 yen, he would have despaired and sold everything. Miyagi insisted he had no reason to despair, as the value was arbitrary. She told him that at least to her, he was a person worth 30 million or 3 billion yen. Kusunoki asked her to stop, saying her kindness would only make him miserable. He already knew she was a nice person, so there was no need to say more. Kusunoki called her annoying, and she told him to be quiet and let her compliment him. He admitted he'd never been told anything like that before. Miyagi clarified that it wasn't kindness, she was just saying what she'd wanted to say. She confessed that at the start, she did think he was only worth 30 yen. However, after their time at the station, she saw that he took her story to heart. From the moment he sympathized with her, Miyagi explained, he was no longer just a subject for observation. The fact that he would talk to her, even in public, made her incredibly happy. Because she had always been invisible and ignored, simple things like eating, talking, and holding hands felt special. She continued, saying that he was the first person to always treat her like she was truly there, which felt like a dream come true. Hearing this, Kusunoki offered to keep doing that for her until he died. Miyagi's face lit up, telling him she would love that because she really loved him. Miyagi then added a somber note, acknowledging that it was no use loving someone who was soon to go away. The weight of her confession hung in the air between them. Kusunoki looked down, contemplating her words. She confessed to telling him many other lies besides the value of his lifespan and hymno. Kusunoki realized the rules about his lifespan being terminated or dying if he strayed too far were also lies. Miyagi confirmed they were all ways to protect herself, offering to let him do anything he wished to her in retribution. Kusunoki asked if she meant anything. She agreed to whatever he desired. He replied then gladly. He pulled her into a sudden, tight embrace. Miyagi's eyes widened in surprise, her hair flying out as she was caught completely off guard by his action. They stood together, holding each other in the field of fireflies. As he held her close, she rested her head on his shoulder. She quietly remarked that his form of retribution was quite terrible. Kusunoki agreed, telling her to mourn for him when he was dead. Miyagi replied that after this, she would never forget him. Kusunoki then reaffirmed his promise to keep being there for her until he died. In that moment, he finally found an objective for his meaningless last months. He decided that he would pay off Miyagi's debt in full, no matter what it took. With only 2 months left, Kusunoki was determined to repay Miyagi's debt, but he knew it would be nearly impossible for an average college student to earn that much money in such a short time. He felt that thanks to her, he was a much happier person than he used to be. He turned to Miyagi and asked, hypothetically, how much his lifespan would be worth if he sold it now. Miyagi sat quietly, listening to his question. Miyagi confirmed that a person's worth is fluid to some extent. However, she explained that his subjective happiness had little effect on the monetary value of his lifespan. Kusunoki asked what would add the most value, and Miyagi listed objective things like social contributions and fame. She noticed his silence and hesitantly called his name. Miyagi pleaded with him not to do anything strange, saying she knew what he was considering. Kusunoki admitted it was true, he was thinking of ways to repay her debt. Miyagi was glad he was thinking of her, but she insisted she didn't want him to let his remaining time go to waste. Kusunoki countered that if she was truly looking out for his happiness, then her judgment was flawed. He then turned the question back to her, asking what happiness meant to her. Miyagi looked at him directly and asked him to pay more attention to her. She noted that he hadn't been talking to her as much lately. Realizing he was hitting the limits of his own imagination, Kusunoki walked into an old bookstore. Inside, a baseball game played on the radio as he greeted the owner. The old man, Gramps, looked up, acknowledging his presence. Kusunoki commented on the hot weather, deciding he needed the imagination of others to solve his problem. Miyagi waited for him in an aisle. Kusunoki approached the old man at the counter and said he wanted to ask something. He posed his question, how should one go about improving their own value? The old man pondered the question, suggesting that being reliable and focusing on what one can do is all there really is. Kusunoki listened intently as the man said that at his age, he couldn't think of a better way. But then, Gramps added that there was something even more important than that. The old man's advice was simple: don't trust the advice of someone like him. He explained that a person who has never achieved anything talking about success is blind to their own failings. He included himself among those with many failures who make the fundamental mistake of talking about them as if they could have been successes. Gramps continued, stating that fixing one's mistakes doesn't equate to success, it's merely a starting point. Kusunoki found it funny, as Miyagi had said something very similar before, that they had only just arrived at the starting line. Next, Kusunoki visited a record store. The employee there offered his own philosophy: if you want to accomplish something in a limited time, you have to depend on others. He admitted he had little faith in his own ability and would seek help from others. Kusunoki wondered if he should take that advice to heart. As Kusunoki and Miyagi left the store, it began to rain. They stood under the awning, watching the downpour. The employee came to the door, holding an umbrella for Kusunoki. Handing him the umbrella, the employee said he didn't know what Kusunoki was up to, but advised him to take care of his health. As Kusunoki and Miyagi walked away under the shared umbrella, other pedestrians passed them by in the rain. Walking in the rain, Kusunoki commented that he quite liked this sort of thing. Miyagi asked what he meant. He explained that he liked the kind gesture of her letting her shoulder get wet, even if it looked comical to others. The rain continued to fall as they found shelter under the awning of a closed shop. There, they ran into someone Kusunoki knew. It was a casual acquaintance from his college major. The classmate greeted Kusunoki, asking where he had been since he hadn't been on campus lately. Kusunoki casually put his arm around Miyagi and introduced her, saying he'd been spending time with her. The classmate called him a creep and said it wasn't funny. Kusunoki acknowledged that he would probably think the same thing in his position. He insisted that Miyagi was real and cute. He told his classmate that while he respected his disbelief, he wanted him to respect his belief. The acquaintance walked away, muttering that Kusunoki was truly deranged. Kusunoki and Miyagi were left standing alone again under the awning. After his classmate left, Miyagi quietly thanked Kusunoki for what he did. As Kusunoki patted her head, he mused on the word reliable. Miyagi then told him that while she was truly glad he would use his remaining time to help her, it wasn't necessary. She explained that he had already been saving her for some time now. Even decades after he was gone, she believed she would be able to look back on their time together and both cry and laugh. Having those memories, she said, would make living much easier, and that was enough for her. Instead of repaying her, she asked him to give her as many memories as he could. She wanted them for after he was gone, so she could warm herself with them when she felt hopelessly alone. With a new purpose, Kusunoki took Miyagi to a lake dotted with small boats. He smiled, ready to begin their memory-making adventure, and said, "Okay, let's go." They got into a swan boat and paddled out onto the water. Miyagi burst into laughter, much to Kusunoki's confusion. She pointed out that to the rental worker, it just looked like a grown man riding a swan boat all by himself. He imagined that in spring, the lake would be covered in cherry petals. And in winter, it would freeze over, with real swans replacing the retired swan boats. It was a lonely thought, realizing he would never see those seasons again. But seeing Miyagi smiling beside him, the lonely thought quickly stopped mattering. Over the next few days, he embarked on one ridiculous act after another. Simply put, he did everything a person isn't supposed to do alone. Though no one else could see her, Kusunoki knew he was doing it all with Miyagi. He tried anything that would be embarrassing to do by himself. At a water park, he urged a hesitant Miyagi to come along. He reminded her she had a swimsuit and tried to reassure her. He told her not to worry since only he could see her, but she admitted that was precisely the embarrassing part. Miyagi, now in her swimsuit, shyly asked for his thoughts. Kusunoki smiled and told her she looked pretty. His compliment caused her to blush and hide her face with her towel. He would always hold her hand and actively say her name. He would make eye contact with her and generally insist on her existence. He didn't notice it at the time, but in the small town, he was gradually becoming an infamous celebrity. Some people sneered at his antics, while others interpreted his actions as performance art. To his surprise, the number of people who reacted poorly was roughly equal to those who seemed happy or soothed by his presence. He wondered why nearly half of the people felt their mood improve seeing his idiotic actions. The answer may have been surprisingly simple. It was because he looked like he was having the time of his life. That alone might have been it. Kusunoki looked up, surprised by her sudden question. Miyagi explained that she felt like he had been the only one giving in their relationship. Sitting across from each other at a low table, Kusunoki asked what brought this on. Kusunoki turned the question around, asking if there was anything he could do for her. Miyagi insisted he already did plenty, but if she had to say, her only wish was to know his wish. Kusunoki playfully mirrored her words back at her, saying his wish was to know hers. She then reminded him of a previous conversation, where she gave 3 answers for what she'd do with only months left to live. Kusunoki recalled her 3 wishes, asking if she wanted to meet her childhood friend. Miyagi looked down, her expression somber. She clarified that she didn't want to meet him directly, just see him from a distance as they boarded a bus. Kusunoki admitted he expected to be disappointed. He felt he could endure it, even if his memories were spoiled. Miyagi explained it was because he was there with her. Kusunoki joked that the best consolation for a loser is seeing a more miserable one. Miyagi told him he was being daft, and that wasn't what she meant. He apologized and gently patted her on the head. She accepted his gesture of comfort. They arrived at a small, quiet train station. Miyagi suddenly looked startled. She leaned against Kusunoki, seeking comfort. Inside the station, a young man with light hair was reading a book. Miyagi stood close to Kusunoki, watching him silently. She walked closer to where Enishi was sitting. Kusunoki observed Enishi, noting he didn't seem to be waiting for a train, but rather for someone coming off one. Enishi had an easygoing confidence. Kusunoki understood that this confidence came from loving and being loved, and quietly suggested to Miyagi that they should leave. Miyagi thanked Kusunoki for his concern, but said she wanted to stay and see what kind of person her childhood friend loved now. A train pulled into the station. Miyagi watched as other passengers gathered on the platform. Enishi looked up from his book, a gentle smile on his face. A young woman with short, light-colored hair got off the train and waved to Enishi. He greeted her warmly, taking a bag from her. As the happy couple stood together, Miyagi watched them from a distance. They walked past, unaware of Miyagi's presence. Back in the empty station waiting room, Kusunoki and Miyagi stood in silence. Miyagi confessed that she had considered taking advantage of her invisibility, but had changed her mind. She admitted she thought about forcibly hugging him. Kusunoki commented that if it were him, he would do more than that, prompting Miyagi to ask what he meant. Instead of answering, Kusunoki leaned in and kissed Miyagi. The kiss lingered for a moment, surprising Miyagi. They stood together in the station doorway after the kiss. Kusunoki remarked that if nobody was going to blame him, there was no reason not to do selfish things. Miyagi quietly agreed that no one would blame him. Kusunoki reflects that a definite change began once his remaining lifespan dropped below 50 days. He was sitting in a diner with Miyagi. Suddenly, a man with light hair put his arm around Kusunoki, mockingly asking if he was having fun all by himself. The man's friend called Kusunoki a creep, and the first man said he'd lost his appetite. Miyagi, unseen by the harassers, angrily offered to call an ambulance for them. As the men laughed, another voice called out to Kusunoki. It was Shinbashi, who calmly asked if Kusunoki was with Ms. Miyagi again today. The large man, Shinbashi, stood over the 2 harassers. He apologized and asked them to give up their seat. Intimidated, the 2 men commented on his size. Kusunoki recognized him as a man from his apartment building. He wondered if Shinbashi was pretending to see Miyagi to help him. Shinbashi stated that he didn't necessarily believe Miyagi actually existed. Kusunoki thanked Shinbashi for his help. Shinbashi clarified that it wasn't just about helping. He explained that he saw what Kusunoki was doing as a form of performance art. He believed Kusunoki was trying to see how many people he could trick into believing Miyagi exists, thereby shaking their sense of reality. Shinbashi confessed that the attempt had somewhat succeeded on him. Kusunoki, surprised, asked if he could actually feel Miyagi's presence. Shinbashi reluctantly admitted that he believed he could. He wondered if he might eventually be able to see her for real, if he fully accepted the presence Kusunoki was projecting. Kusunoki began to describe Miyagi to him, saying she has fair skin and cold eyes, but sometimes a modest smile. Shinbashi was taken aback, saying those characteristics matched exactly how he had imagined her. Kusunoki then told him that Miyagi was standing right in front of him. He asked why Shinbashi thought his imagination was so accurate, but Shinbashi had no answer. Kusunoki told Shinbashi that Miyagi wanted to shake his hand. Hesitantly, Shinbashi held out his hand. Miyagi watched him, a small smile on her face. As their hands met, Shinbashi looked uncertain. Kusunoki explained that while Shinbashi might think he was moving his own hand, Miyagi was actually shaking it. Shinbashi asked Kusunoki to thank Miyagi for him. Kusunoki relayed the message, and Shinbashi seemed pleased, saying he somehow felt she might thank him. He concluded that perhaps he wasn't the only one who could sense her presence. Miyagi mused that if something just gets the ball rolling, her existence might be accepted by everyone. Kusunoki realized he was right. After that event, people started to accept Miyagi's existence. It wasn't a serious belief, but more like they were playing along with his nonsense. As he and Miyagi frequented town attractions, he became a bit famous as a pitiable but interesting fellow. One night, a woman named Suzumi playfully gestured to the empty space beside him, asking if the cute Miyagi was there. At a gathering with friends, Suzumi remarked that now she could almost feel Miyagi's presence. Another friend, a Sakura, noted that he tried to catch Kusunoki in a contradiction, but found his story perfectly consistent. Kusunoki simply poured Miyagi a drink, continuing the pretense. A Sakura joked that if he could see Miyagi, he'd probably fall for her in no time. Kusunoki confidently replied that it wouldn't matter, because Miyagi liked him. Flustered, Miyagi lightly bopped him on the head, telling him not to say things like that. Another friend, Riko, excitedly asked Kusunoki to show them just how much he liked Miyagi. The others agreed, wanting to see. The group of friends watched them expectantly. Kusunoki turned to Miyagi. She gave a shy nod of consent. In front of all his friends, Kusunoki kissed Miyagi. The friends cheered, and even Kusunoki was stunned by the absurdity of his own actions. He knew they thought him a crazed fool, but he wondered what was so wrong with that. Kusunoki reflects that for better or worse, that summer he was the best clown in town. That night he lay in bed next to Miyagi. She slept peacefully beside him. He watched her, unable to sleep himself. He filled a glass with water from the tap. Unable to sleep, Kusunoki got up for a drink. He walked through his small apartment and noticed Miyagi's sketchbook. He picked it up and began to look through it. He was surprised to find much more drawn inside than he'd expected, sketches of the festival stands, the school, and the station waiting room. He paused, looking closer at one of the pages. Miyagi had drawn a sketch of him sleeping. In return, Kusunoki turned to a new page and began to draw Miyagi sleeping. It had been years since he'd drawn a piece of art without stopping. He was engaging with art again, the very thing that had burned him out before. Looking at his completed work, he felt surprise and satisfaction, but also a tiny, nagging feeling. He knew it would be easy to overlook the failing and go back to sleep. But he was sure of something and held his pencil ready. He strained his senses, concentrating fully to figure out what that nagging feeling was. He felt like he was reaching for a letter floating in a stormy sea, his hand always slipping as he tried to grasp it. After many minutes, just as he was about to give up, the idea landed naturally in his palm. The next moment, as if possessed, his pencil flew across the sketchbook with intensity. He continued drawing for the entire night. At an evening fireworks show, Kusunoki and Miyagi walk through the crowded festival grounds. They are spotted by a group of acquaintances who call out his name. Kusunoki laughs and awkwardly waves back, with Miyagi's hand held high by his. One of the friends remarks on what a great girl he has. Kusunoki proudly puts his arm around Miyagi, agreeing but jokingly telling them they can't have her. The friends laugh, and Kusunoki feels a genuine sense of happiness. He reflects that even if they didn't truly believe she was there, he was glad they enjoyed his nonsense. As an announcement declares the show will begin shortly, Kusunoki finds it better to enjoy the fiction of company than to dwell on being alone. A firework shoots into the dark sky. It explodes in a brilliant flash. The crowd below watches in awe. Away from the crowd, they watch the fireworks explode over the school building. Kusunoki and Miyagi lie together in the grass. With his hands behind his head, Kusunoki looks content. After a moment of silence, he turns to Miyagi. Kusunoki tells her they're a good match. Miyagi replies that this has happened before in bed. Kusunoki smiles, remembering, and agrees that it did. Miyagi suggests he watch the fireworks instead of her, since he can look at her any time. Kusunoki muses that may not be quite true. He clarifies that while he has the next day off, he'll be back the day after, gone for only one day. He insists that's not the problem. Miyagi, confused, asks what is. Kusunoki tells Miyagi he's become somewhat popular and that he feels proud of the smiles he gets, whether they're from fondness or mockery. He recalls a classmate from grade school he used to hate. The boy was a smart kid who played the clown to get others to like him, something Kusunoki couldn't stand. But now he admits he's come to understand and even envy him. He confesses that from the start, he wanted to befriend the world like this, and thanks to Miyagi he succeeded. Miyagi tells him that's a great thing to hear. She then asks what he's really trying to say. Kusunoki struggles for words, finally saying he supposes he just wants to thank her for everything. Miyagi listens silently, her expression unreadable. Miyagi points out that he still has over a month left, so it's a bit soon for goodbyes. Kusunoki then reminds her that she wanted to know his wish. Miyagi agrees, promising to do anything if it's possible. With her consent, Kusunoki says he will be honest. He looks away and states his meager wish that when he dies she forgets about him completely. Miyagi's expression hardens and she gives a single firm answer, no. Kusunoki sees that Miyagi has figured out his plan for tomorrow. She begs him not to do anything stupid. He tries to reassure her, saying that no one would have expected his 30-yen life to have such wonderful final days. He explains that while he should have lived the worst life imaginable, he found great happiness, making his uncertain future less daunting. He continues, suggesting someone more dependable could appear and make her happier, but Miyagi immediately rejects the idea. Kusunoki counters that she never should have appeared for him either, so maybe someone else will for her, but she cuts him off, shouting that they won't. Overwhelmed with emotion, Miyagi pushes Kusunoki down onto the grass. Leaning over him, she begins to plead. She looks down at him, begging. She begs him to stay with her, at least for this last month. Through tears, she confesses that she can put up with his impending death and her long, lonely future, but not this. Miyagi continues to plead, saying she can accept all the hardships as long as he is with her for now. She begs him not to throw himself away as the fireworks continue to light up the sky. That night they return to his apartment. They lie together in his bed, Kusunoki holding her close. Miyagi's tears didn't stop until the very end. The next morning, under a crescent moon, they stand at the door. They share one last embrace. Miyagi pulls back to look at him. With a gentle smile on her face, she says her farewell. She tells him goodbye, saying he made her happy. Later that day, Kusunoki is back at the Lifespan shop. The substitute observer asks if he came knowing this would happen. Kusunoki confirms he did, having sold his remaining 30 days. The employee at the desk advises against it, questioning if money is still a concern at this point. The shop employee tries to change his mind, explaining that if he spent his last month painting, his work would be remembered in art history for years to come. She tells him he would have 30 days to paint fervently. His observer would be there to encourage him. His name would be remembered long after his death, and she asks what dissatisfies him about that future. Kusunoki calmly replies that just as money is meaningless after death, so is fame. The employee asks if he doesn't want to be eternal. He says there's nothing to be glad about in being eternal in a world where he no longer exists. He thinks about the future he's giving up. His paintings would have been called the world's plainest pictures, sparking dispute, but ultimately selling for high prices. But since he sold those 30 days, that future was now just something that could have been but never would. Kusunoki reflects that his artistic talent might have blossomed on its own over a very long time. But he was destined to lose that chance in a bike crash. By selling his lifespan and, more importantly, having Miyagi with him, that process was shortened because he looked so happy. He recalls his past proficiency in art, how he could effortlessly copy and express any scenery. He could look at a painting and understand exactly why it was made. But at 17, he gave up, feeling he couldn't become as famous as he promised Hyemno. He decided he would only pick up a brush again once everything aligned perfectly. However, at age 19, he hastily picked up the brush again and, as a result, lost his talent. His attempts were filled with confusion, as he no longer had a sense for lines or colors. He realizes his mistake was trying to create art with universal appeal. This severe error put him in a state where he was unable to draw. He now understands that true art comes from deep within oneself, something wholly individual, not from seeking universal favor. To realize this, he had to draw simply for his own enjoyment. It was Miyagi who gave him that chance, and by drawing her as she slept, he finally figured out his art again. The shop employee informs him the transaction is complete, the right to have his name in history sold for a shocking amount. She notes that the 30 days aren't quite enough to repay Miyagi's debt, but she'll be free after 3 more years of work, which Kusunoki accepts. The substitute observer tells him they don't take the last 3 days, letting him spend them as he likes. As Kusunoki leaves, the man wonders aloud about 30 days being more valuable than 30 years. And so Kusunoki denied eternity as the summer Hymno had made a prediction about was ending. Her prediction was half wrong, he was never rich or famous. But as he looks up at the sky, he knows her prediction was also half right. Just as Hymno had said, something really good had happened, and deep down, looking at the sun breaking through the clouds, he could finally be glad that he lived. It was the first morning of Kusunoki's remaining 3 days. He realized that without an observer's eyes on him, Miyagi was gone. Kusunoki drove his scooter to all the places he had visited with Miyagi, but this time, he was truly alone. The empty restaurant served as a stark reminder of her absence. He passed through the quiet library they had once shared. The lonely pier was another stop on his nostalgic tour. As he drove under the blue sky, searching for her lingering scent, he wondered if Miyagi was now observing someone else. He prayed that her new charge wouldn't turn desperate and attack her. He hoped she could keep working until her debt was paid, and live a life so happy that she would forget all about him. He continued on his way, praying that someone far more precious than him would appear for Miyagi, someone who would value her just as much. His solitary wandering eventually led him to a park with a large fountain. A group of young boys were playing nearby, their game momentarily paused as they noticed him. Suddenly, Kusunoki had an idea. He gestured to the empty space beside him and called out, pretending Miyagi was there. He thought that for everyone else, this would just seem like business as usual. He reached out his hand to the empty air beside him. But he felt a profound emptiness. For him, the difference was huge. In fact, it was hardly the same thing at all. He stood alone, his shadow stretching out before him, the only thing accompanying him in the vast white void of his solitude. A thought struck him, what if it had all been an illusion from the start? He was convinced his life would end in 3 days. He could feel that the last shred of it was nearly used up. That sensation couldn't be fake. But he began to question if the girl named Miyagi truly existed. He wondered if her existence, and even the shop that dealt in lifespans, was just a convenient fantasy born from his feelings of being cornered by his impending death. Sitting by the fountain, lost in his thoughts, Kusunoki had no way of knowing what was about to happen. A familiar voice called out his name, and he looked up to see the young couple he knew approaching him. The young woman asked how Ms. Miyagi was. With a faint, sad smile, Kusunoki prepared his answer. He told them that she wasn't there anymore. The couple was shocked, asking what happened and if they had a fight. Kusunoki vaguely confirmed their suspicion. Taking his words at face value, his friend told him not to fight, and they walked him back to the fountain. The young woman seemed to take some comfort in the news. She mused that if even a couple as compatible as Kusunoki and Miyagi could argue, then it was no surprise that she and her partner would too. He wanted to smile and agree, to say that she was right. But instead, the weight of his loneliness and the reality of her absence hit him all at once, and tears began to stream down his face. His friends watched in concerned silence. He broke down completely, unable to hold back his grief. The children who had been playing nearby also stopped to watch. Soon, a small crowd gathered around them. His acquaintances Asakura and Suzumi stepped forward, asking what was wrong. Unsure how to answer, Kusunoki made up a story that they had fought and split up, that she had abandoned him. Another woman in the crowd commented on what Miyagi didn't like about him. The crowd reacted with surprise, remarking that Miyagi never seemed like the type to do something so cruel. They were all talking as if they truly believed she existed. One man couldn't believe she would ditch such a good guy. Another called her a good-for-nothing girl. As someone agreed that it was a shame for such a good person, a familiar voice from behind the fountain said, "Indeed." Kusunoki's eyes widened in disbelief. He knew that voice, it would take centuries for him to forget. He couldn't have misheard, but until he saw her with his own eyes, he wouldn't believe it. He turned around, needing to be sure. And there she was, smiling gently. He heard the crowd's whispers about the good-for-nothing Miyagi girl. She stepped forward and said, "I'm back, Mr. Kusunoki. I was looking for you." A man from the crowd cautiously asked if she was Ms. Miyagi. She gently placed her hands on Kusunoki's shoulders. She confirmed that she was, indeed, the good-for-nothing Miyagi. The man erupted in excitement, exclaiming that she really exists. He added that she was incredibly pretty, making him jealous. Kusunoki was bewildered, wondering why Miyagi was here and why others could see her. Asakura cleared his throat, getting the crowd's attention. He addressed everyone present. The crowd, understanding the situation, began to disperse, offering words of encouragement. Kusunoki quietly thanked them. Asakura smiled, commenting that Miyagi was just his kind of girl. Asakura and Suzumi waved goodbye, wishing the two of them happiness. Kusunoki and Miyagi were left standing alone together. Miyagi turned to him, noting how strange it all was, and asking how she could be there. Kusunoki asked how everyone was able to see her. She smiled and explained that the answer was rather simple. She told him that, in short, she did the same thing he did. Stunned, Kusunoki processed her words. He asked in a hushed voice, "How much did you sell?" Miyagi smiled and replied, "Also the same. I sold all of it, all but 3 days." She explained that the substitute observer contacted her right after he sold his lifespan, telling her what he'd done to pay her debt. As soon as she heard that, she made up her mind and completed the formalities. Miyagi called him impressive for buying back most of her life with just 30 days of his. Kusunoki apologized, saying he threw away the life she worked so hard to get back for him. She called herself a fool, but he disagreed. He insisted that if anyone was a fool, it was him. Kusunoki confessed he couldn't live without her for even 3 days and wasn't sure what he would have done. They held each other close, both smiling. Miyagi reassured him, explaining that not only was her debt paid, but they had plenty of money left. Kusunoki realized with a laugh that they were rich, and Miyagi happily agreed. They embraced tightly. They stood close, their foreheads touching, sharing a moment of pure, quiet joy. He knew he would die, leaving nothing behind, but he didn't mind that. He no longer needed the eternity he once dreamed of, and he didn't care if no one remembered him. Because she was here with him, smiling at his side. Miyagi told him that just because of that, she could forgive everything else. She then asked him how he planned to spend their 3 days. Kusunoki looked at her, a gentle smile on his face, believing in the value of their short time. He compared these 3 days to the tragic 30 years he would have lived. He knew these worthwhile 30 days he would have lived paled in comparison. He knew their 3 days together were of much, much more value. Hand in hand, they walked away, ready to begin their final 3 days of happiness.